They were not built to stock ships. They were not even meant for the Pacific. Yet by 1944, the B-29 Superfortress, America's most expensive war machine, was suddenly being used like a high-altitude predator. From the cramped glass nose to the humming radar sets buried in its belly, this bomber became the U.S. military's long-range set of eyes, sniffing out what was left of the Japanese Navy across thousands of miles of empty ocean. But here's the real twist. The B-29 didn't hunt Japan's fleets the way fighters or submarines did. It hunted them by making sure they had nowhere left to run. By the time American bombers appeared over the Pacific, the clock had already been ticking down for Japan's naval empire. The meltdown began fast and violently. After the disaster at the Battle of Midway, the once elite cadre of Japanese carrier pilots, arguably the best in the world in 1941, were gone in a matter of minutes. The loss of carriers was devastating, but the loss of irreplaceable aviators was fatal. Japan simply didn't have the pilot training pipeline that the US had built deliberately and aggressively. But hardware losses were only half the problem. A quieter killer was creeping in: fuel. The entire Imperial Navy ran on imported petroleum. When the United States Navy submarines shifted strategy in late 1943 and began targeting Japanese oil tankers, the effects were suffocating. Slowly, systematically, the fleet starved. By 1944, major warships were sitting idle, not because they were damaged, but because there simply wasn't enough fuel to move them. Japan had aircraft it couldn't fly, ships it couldn't sail, and pilots it couldn't train. The Navy wasn't dying in battle anymore. It was shaking in place. Meanwhile, the US had a different problem. They couldn't find what was left of the Japanese fleet. After the crushing defeats of 1943 to 44, Japanese admirals scattered surviving vessels across the Pacific. Some hid in protected harbors. Others avoided open confrontation entirely. For American planners, this created dangerous intelligence gaps. They didn't know which naval bases still operated, which ships were seaworthy, or where the next counterattack might come from. Then came the B-29 Superfortress, built to burn down cities with incendiaries, but its extreme altitude, long range, and endurance made it the perfect reconnaissance platform. Before it became the symbol of destruction, it became the eyes the US desperately needed. The bomber meant for Tokyo became the spotlight that exposed a navy already on its knees. Japan wasn't defeated when the B-29 arrived. It was already bleeding out. The bomber simply revealed the truth. When most people picture the atomic bombings, they imagine a standard American bomber soaring over Japan. But the truth is far stranger. The planes that carried the first nuclear weapons weren't standard at all. They were a hidden fleet of highly modified bombers, known as Silver Plate, a shadow project tucked inside the seemingly ordinary world of the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. Back in 1943, the US faced a brutally simple engineering dilemma. The Manhattan Project was close to creating weapons unlike anything ever built. 10,000-pound giants with awkward shapes, unpredictable fusing systems, and blast effects no one fully understood. The Air Corps needed a delivery system, and none existed. The only bomber even close was the B-29, but it was already notorious. Its engines overheated, its systems failed, and as Curtis LeMay famously joked, it had more bugs than the Smithsonian's insect collection. Still, it had range, altitude, and potential, three things the US desperately needed. So in late 1943, a secret order went out. Take a single B-29 to Wright Field in Dayton and rebuild it for a purpose no one would ever be told. That was the start of the Silver Plate project. The first prototype was hacked apart to carry the original plutonium Thin Man bomb. Engineers ripped out the fuselage between the two bomb bays, removed radars, tore out bulkheads, and installed a custom suspension system strong enough to cradle a 17-foot weapon. It didn't matter that Thin Man ultimately failed. The experiment proved something more important. The B-29 could be reshaped. From there, Silver Plate evolved fast. When the uranium Little Boy and the spherical plutonium Fat Man became the primary designs, engineers switched gears. They restored the two-bay layout, but installed reinforced H-frame structures, dual-release systems, and new sway braces designed specifically for atomic payloads. They added an entirely new crew position, the electronics test officer, whose job was to monitor and arm the bomb mid-flight, a responsibility no previous bomber crew had ever faced. To help the aircraft escape the blast, planners insisted on more speed and a better climb rate. Weight had to drop. So, the turrets came off. The armor came off. Even the dorsal blister was removed. Then came the performance upgrades, new Wright R3350-41 engines with improved cooling, redesigned fuel and manifold systems, and reverse pitch propellers for safer landings. Pneumatic bomb bay doors replaced hydraulic ones, shaving precious seconds off the escape maneuver. By early 1945, the final batch of 20 silverplate B-29s rolled out of the Glenn Martin Aircraft Plant. Lightweight, fast, and purpose-built for a mission only a handful of people on Earth understood. These weren't just bombers. They were engineered escape artists, the only machines capable of delivering a weapon powerful enough to end a war, and then outrunning the sunrise behind them. The first real warning shot came in November 1944 when a lone B-29 slipped over Tokyo on a pure reconnaissance run. The crew returned with thousands of crisp aerial photos, but the real discovery was invisible. At bombing altitude, they had flown into powerful, roaring winds that shoved the Superfortress around like a toy. Speeds topped 200 miles per hour, far beyond anything the Air Corps expected. Without realizing it, they had stumbled into the jet stream, a phenomenon barely understood at the time, and it threatened to derail the entire bombing campaign before it even began. For a high-altitude bomber, this was a nightmare. Bombs wouldn't fall straight. They drifted miles off target. Bomb runs couldn't be timed. Fuel calculations were shredded mid-air. Crews would limp home with tanks nearly dry, stunned to find that headwinds had eaten through their reserves. Some never made it back, forced to ditch into the Pacific long before reaching base. And even when the winds didn't kill them, their own engines might. The Wright R3350 was powerful but temperamental, a machine that could soar at 30,000 feet or burst into flames on takeoff. Tropical heat only made things worse. Many B-29 crews feared the engines more than Japanese interceptors. A fire at altitude meant almost certain loss. There was no way to extinguish it, no safe place to land. But everything changed when the Marianas fell in mid-1944. Saipan, Tinian, and Guam gave the U.S. the one thing they had never had before: unbeatable reach. Airfields rose from coral and jungle faster than anywhere else in the world. Northfield on Tinian alone had 4 enormous runways, the largest bomber base of the entire war. Suddenly, every major Japanese city was in range. No more dangerous supply flights over the Himalayas. No more logistical gymnastics. The B-29 could finally strike Japan directly, as often as weather and maintenance allowed. But the winds didn't disappear, and neither did the lousy accuracy of high-altitude precision bombing. By January 1945, command shifted to General Curtis LeMay, and he tore up the old rulebook. LeMay's shift in doctrine turned the entire air war upside down. Instead of tight precision formations at 30,000 feet, he ordered single aircraft night runs at low altitude. Every B-29 shed most of its defensive guns to save weight. Only the tail guns stayed. The freed-up capacity was crammed with extra fuel and walls of incendiaries. If the wind scattered bombs from the sky, then the answer was brutally simple: fly under the winds, drop more fire, and burn cities from the inside out. The M69 became the star of this new strategy. It looked small and almost harmless, a metal tube stuffed with napalm gel. But when dozens of them burst out of a single cluster bomb, they turned Tokyo's wooden neighborhoods into a furnace. These bomblets punched through paper-thin roofs, splattered burning gel into every corner, and created thousands of ignition points simultaneously. Larger incendiaries followed behind, feeding oxygen, sustaining heat, and making it impossible for firefighters or civilians to contain even a single block. Everything Japan feared became real on the night of March 9th to 10th, 1945. More than 300 B-29s roared over Tokyo at barely 5,000 to 9,000 feet, low enough that crews could see the glow of the city before the bombs hit. They carved a giant, fiery X across the Shitamachi district. One by one, waves of bombers spread outward, tracing heat and destruction across the capital. What happened next is still the deadliest air raid in human history. 16 square miles vanished into smoke and ash. Over 90,000 people died in a few hours. 1 million were left homeless. Entire neighborhoods collapsed into firestorms so intense that even canals, the usual escape route, began to boil. People jumped into the water to save themselves, only to be overtaken by steam and heat. There's no way to show that level of human suffering without breaking modern content rules, but anyone who survived described it as hell brought to earth. And Tokyo was just the beginning. Night after night, city after city, Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, Yokohama, went up in flames. By the end of the summer, 66 cities had burned, and nearly half of urban Japan lay in ruins. The official justification was simple: Japan's war industry was hidden inside homes and small workshops. Burn the cities, and you cripple the war machine. But that logic collided with the awful truth. Most people who died were ordinary civilians who had no connection to the military at all. More died in Tokyo's firebombing than in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. And still, the campaign continued, darker, deadlier, and leading toward a final horror for the crews who never made it home. The final chapter of the B-29's wartime story was its most infamous and devastating: the delivery of the atomic bombs, a chilling demonstration of human ingenuity turned lethal. By mid-1945, the 509th Composite Group had transformed Tinian Island into a hub of meticulous preparation, training relentlessly with pumpkin bombs, carefully engineered conventional explosives that mimicked the weight and flight characteristics of the actual atomic devices. These exercises were not just drills. They were dress rehearsals for a mission that would forever alter the course of warfare. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay took off, carrying Little Boy to Hiroshima, flanked by 6 other silver plate B-29s performing essential reconnaissance, scientific monitoring, and photographic duties. The world below had no warning of the catastrophe about to unfold. Just 3 days later, Boxcar delivered Fat Man to Nagasaki, although some planned photographic support failed to rendezvous, a small detail in a mission already defined by scale and devastation. The silver plate B-29s were extraordinary machines, modified extensively to carry these colossal bombs. Defensive guns were removed, bomb bays were reconstructed, and every effort was made to maximize range and precision. The immediate human cost was staggering. Tens of thousands perished instantly, and, in the weeks that followed, radiation claimed countless more. The U.S. had even prepared a third bomb, a grim contingency if Japan refused to surrender, revealing the almost unimaginable scope of destruction on the table. Beyond the war, these B-29s didn't vanish quietly. They continued to serve in the U.S. Air Force's Strategic Air Command until 1949, acting as both instruments of power and symbols of American military dominance. They were later involved in post-war nuclear testing, most notably during Operation Crossroads at Bikini Atoll in 1946, where entire fleets of ships were rendered radioactive, a stark reminder that the reach of atomic power extended far beyond any single mission. In the end, the B-29's legacy is impossible to separate from the moral and technological extremes it represents. It was a genius combo of engineering, capable of precision, endurance, and raw destructive force. Yet it also became a symbol of the horrifying potential of human warfare, a machine that could turn cities into ash and forever change the way we understand the power of the skies. The story of the B-29 shows both amazing human invention and the terrible costs of war. From dangerous missions over Japan to firebombing and atomic bombs, it changed history and affected countless lives, Remembering this past helps us understand the power and the consequences of war. If you found this story fascinating, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel, ask questions, and see how history's lessons can still teach us about courage, creativity, and the choices people make in extreme times.